The sea was my ally once, obedient and endless, a black mirror that reflected not only the stars but my own certainty that we, the U-boat captains of the Kriegsmarine, were the hunters, not the hunted. Yet on that cursed morning of 1944, as the grey Atlantic rolled beneath the belly of U-515, that illusion shattered faster than a pressure gauge under a sudden crush. The crew was quiet, eerily so, each man lost in thoughts he would never voice, because silence was safety, and sound was death. I remember gripping the periscope handles, scanning a patch of ocean that was smooth, too smooth, the kind of deceptive calm that hides predators. They called us the ghosts of the deep, but that morning I learned ghosts can bleed. At 0803 hours, the sonar operator whispered a word that chilled my spine more than any Arctic current: contact. Not a distant echo, not a merchant convoy ripe for ambush, no, this was precision, mechanical and deliberate, moving toward us faster than any destroyer I'd ever heard. Hedgehog, someone mouthed in disbelief. The word itself sounded ridiculous, almost harmless, something a child might find amusing. But in the seconds that followed, that harmless word became the judgment of God itself. The first salvo hit the water like a rain of iron hail, each splash marking our doom. In that narrow steel coffin 200 feet below, the sound was different, less a splash than a hollow thump, a vibration that crept through the hull and into our bones. We had learned the pattern of British attacks: depth charges fell, rolled, and exploded in predictable rhythm, but this new rain of explosives didn't roll or drift. They sank in silence, hunting us not through guesswork but precision. For 90 seconds, the ocean around us became a living thing, vibrating, tightening, pressing, as if the sea itself had turned against us. I ordered evasive maneuvers, barking commands into the stale air, but our engines coughed and stuttered as sonar pings grew louder, closer, merciless. Then came the waiting, those final seconds where every breath feels stolen and the universe holds its breath with you. A bright flash, inside my skull rather than outside, followed by a rip that wasn't just steel bending but trust unraveling. I heard men screaming, not from pain but disbelief, their faith in German engineering breaking before their bodies did. Water punched through seams like bullets through flesh. The controls flickered. For a moment, I thought we'd evaded it, that the sounds were only illusions of fear, but hedgehogs don't bluff. 90 seconds after the first splash, we were no longer a hunter but a carcass sinking into infinite blue. My hands trembled on the periscope as the lights went out, and the last thing I saw was not the enemy ship but a faint glimmer, a white trail rising through water like a ghost ascending. In that moment, I knew the war had changed forever. The unseen had found a way to see us. I thought I understood death before that day, but the hedgehog taught me that death could be efficient, quiet, almost scientific. It didn't thunder like the old charges, it whispered, precise and patient, erasing men not through fire but through mathematics. Even as the hull twisted and the control room screamed under collapsing pressure, I remember thinking, not of Germany, nor of the officers who sent us, but of the sea itself. The Atlantic, once our empire, had turned into our executioner. And as I was thrown against the bulkhead, hearing the bones of my ship groan like an old beast dying, I understood the cruel poetry of it all, the hunter's silence claimed by a weapon built from silence. The last air bubbles surged upward, carrying whispers of our names no one would ever hear. I do not remember the exact moment when silence became a living thing, pressing against my skull and making each heartbeat feel like a drum echoing through eternity. The blast had thrown me backward, stealing both sound and reason, and when my senses finally crawled back to life, the world had become a trembling shadow of what it was before. Sea water hissed somewhere behind me, filtering through a broken joint, whispering like a serpent. I tried to speak, to command, but all that came out was a hoarse croak. Around me, men struggled in silence, no shouting, no panic, just the eerie discipline of sailors who knew that to speak was to admit despair. Red lights flickered, painting the cabin like a wound filled with blood. The hedgehog had done its work. Unlike depth charges, it hadn't needed to shake us apart for minutes on end. It simply struck true, once and terribly, ripping through our hull in a puncture small enough to deceive the eye, large enough to condemn us slowly. I crawled toward the control panels, brushing past shards of glass and oil, every smell mixing, the acid tang of battery fluid, the iron scent of blood, the smoky bite of scorched insulation. Through the darkness, the sonar operator's chair was empty, still spinning slightly from the impact, while his headphones dangled, hissing with static. I snatched the periscope handle again out of habit, but the glass was webbed with fractures. My reflection stared back in twisted fragments, half man, half ghost. Above us, the British ships moved like sharks, their propellers slicing the water, patient and methodical. They knew we were hurt, they were waiting. I ordered ballast control, partial blow, to lift us slightly, but the air pumps coughed, wheezed, and died. So we hung there, suspended between the living and the dead, too heavy to rise, too alive to sink. My first officer, Willebrand, stumbled toward me, clutching his arm where a jagged piece of shrapnel had torn through his sleeve. "Sir," he muttered, "they shouldn't have found us so fast." His eyes flicked upward, hollow and confused. I didn't answer because I didn't know. The hedgehog changed everything. Its advantage wasn't just explosive power, it was precision. The English had found a way to turn mathematics into mortality. One volley and our invisibility was gone. The men whispered it among themselves even as I barked orders. The Allies can see under the sea now. I felt it too, that terror that comes when old rules no longer work. For years, we had relied on silence, on shadows, on the arrogance that the deep was our home and our shield. But suddenly, in 90 seconds, they had taken both away. The walls of our submarine creaked like an old church bending under weight. Somewhere aft, a cry broke through, a man trapped under collapsed metal, and it was followed by a silence so complete it hurt to hear. I wanted to believe we could survive. I wanted to believe that the same sea that had swallowed our enemies would cradle us once more. But belief couldn't keep the lights from dying. The generator failed second by second until the glow turned to a whisper and then to nothing. In that suffocating dark, every sound grew colossal, the dripping water, the strained breathing, the slow death of a machine that had once been our pride. I thought of the Admiral's words before our mission, "Control the Atlantic, and you control destiny." But here, in that drifting steel tomb, destiny was no more controllable than the tide. Death wasn't glorious, it was quiet, methodical, efficient, British. The hedgehog had not just sunk our ship, it had shattered the myth that German U-boats were untouchable. It was the end of an era, though we did not know it yet. The ocean trembled, and I felt the U-boat slide lower, the crushed bodies of my men pressing against my memories. Every captain believes his crew will live forever beneath his command, but in that moment, I understood the truth every sailor fears: we are all temporary guests in a kingdom that belongs to the sea. Silence after destruction is never silence at all, it is filled with ghosts, echoes of screams, the dying heartbeat of machinery that refuses to accept oblivion. When I regained consciousness, the world around me was low and thick, filled with the taste of metal and salt, and a dim green glow swam lazily through the fractured bulkhead. The hedgehog strike had split us open like an egg, but somehow part of the forward compartment had sealed itself by sheer pressure equilibrium. It was death trapping life inside itself. I could hear faint movements, groans, voices half smothered by fear and seawater. The watch officer, young Mertz, barely 21, was slumped near the navigation table, his face pale, hair slicked with oil, staring at me with the stunned disbelief of a man who had just seen the devil lift his hat. "Hauptmann," he croaked, voice trembling, "are we still alive?" I wanted to say yes, wanted to command as captains do, with strength and purpose, but my throat betrayed me with a rasping laugh instead. The sea had shown me mercy, but a cruel kind, the mercy of extended awareness. I looked at the pressure gauge, it fluttered near 300 feet and held steady. Somehow, the U-boat rested on a gentle slope of the seabed. That meant we were trapped, but intact, for now. I crawled through the debris, each motion stirring clouds of oil and silt that danced in the lantern light like black snow. Dead men floated quietly against the ceiling, tethered by straps that had once kept them safe, now holding them as grim ornaments. The air smelled of battery acid and burned insulation. A hissing noise echoed somewhere near the aft compartment, compressed air escaping, a reminder that time, here, did not flow but leaked slowly away. I gathered the survivors, 5 men out of 47, all of them hollow-eyed shades of who they had been. We whispered, because loud voices felt blasphemous down here. I told them we would wait, conserve air, and pray for rescue, though every word tasted of lies. The destroyers above us had moved on, or so we thought. Every few minutes, faint distant thuds rippled through the hull, reminders that the surface still hunted the dead. One man began to mutter prayers, another traced the shape of the iron cross pendant pressed against his chest, as if the metal could barter with the ocean. I found myself staring at the control levers, half shattered, half functional, wondering if humanity's genius had gone too far, that we built machines capable of both brilliance and burial. The hedgehog, it wasn't just a weapon, it was a mathematician's solution to man's arrogance. It didn't explode by accident, it calculated, triangulated, predicted, and punished. The crackling of the broken intercom startled me. A voice, distant and warped by water interference, murmured through static, English, calm, almost compassionate, "We have you, U-boat. No use running." I froze. The others stared at me, horror dawning in their eyes. The British were still above us, listening, waiting. We were a specimen in a glass jar, a captured breath held between life and implosion. I considered scuttling the ship, ending it with dignity as others had done, but a flicker of memory held me still, my daughter, Lotte, 7 years old, drawing a picture of our submarine and calling it Papa's fish. That image burned brighter than any commandment from Berlin. For days, hours, time had lost meaning, we fought for breath, rationing the stifling air, refusing to surrender but lacking the strength to resist. The darkness pressed heavier than the sea itself. One by one, the men fell silent, faces turning waxy and still. When the last one slipped into that heavy sleep, I sat against the hull, listening to the faint tapping above. Whether it was rescue or final judgment, I could no longer tell. My eyelids drooped, and the line between consciousness and delirium blurred. The last thing I remember before the blackness took me was hearing something remarkable, singing above the waves. The enemy, the victors, humming a tune carried faintly through the water. It wasn't triumphal, it wasn't cruel, it was mournful, almost like a requiem. Perhaps they knew what they had done. Perhaps they pitied the ghosts trapped below. Either way, as the last breath left my lungs, I realized the truth no propaganda could mask. The ocean owed loyalty to no flag, and war had finally claimed even its hunters. They say when death comes, it arrives like a storm, violent and sudden, but in truth, it comes as a slow leak, steady and merciless, draining what little humanity remains in you. I awoke again, unsure if hours or days had passed. Darkness had become a living presence, pressing against our skin, feeding on our fear. The stench of oil and bodies had turned the air into poison, thick and sweet, every breath a negotiation with nausea. My hands trembled as I reached for the logbook, writing with numb fingers, though I knew no one would ever read it. The ink swam on the page, black tears bleeding into the paper as the submarine moaned under pressure. Somewhere to my left, the last functioning lamp flickered. The beam fell across Mertz's face, his youth gone, his eyes open but empty, and I looked away. The air gauge showed less than an hour's worth left. In truth, that could mean anything down here. I gathered what remained of my mind and forced myself toward the communications console. Static whispered endlessly, like the sea mocking us. I tried the transmitter again, sending a final code burst, a simple message: alive, stop, need rescue, stop, air depleted, stop. The sound crackled back, faint, then gone. I laughed softly. Even if it reached them, mercy was a weak currency in 1944. Through the bulkhead came a dull metallic groan, followed by a shift. The boat was moving. Whether it was the seabed slipping beneath us or something outside pulling, I could not tell. My pulse quickened. Hope smells a lot like madness when death is close. Crawling toward the observation port, I peered through the tiny glass oval, fogged and fractured. Out there, vague cones of light shimmered, search lamps slicing through the gloom, distant, ghostly. For a moment, I thought we had been found. But then another realization hit: the voices, faint and rhythmic, did not come from English patrols. They were inside my own head. When men linger too long in darkness, the mind begins to invent light. I heard my daughter's voice, clear as a bell, calling my name as we used to play near the harbor before the war. She sounded untouched by years, by lies, by this choking war that had devoured fathers by the thousands. I pressed my hand against the cold hull, whispering an apology to the sea, to her, to the broken machine that had carried us into this floating grave. The ocean wasn't cruel, it was honest. It never pretended that survival was deserved. Another tremor shook the U-boat, and suddenly a faint whoosh of bubbles surrounded us, a shift in pressure, maybe a break in a distant compartment. The men I'd thought dead twitched. One gasped suddenly, his mind clawing its way back just as I had done hours before. His eyes darted wildly, finding me. "Captain," he rasped, "are we going home?" The simplicity of the question shattered me far worse than any explosion. I had no answer. Not yes, not no, just silence. Outside, the faint lights vanished. The sea had reclaimed them, leaving only the black again. The creaking stopped, the water ceased its hissing, and the entire submarine seemed to sigh, as though surrendering. I slumped beside the control levers, the metal cold and comforting. My hand brushed the trigger for the self-scuttling charge, an option given to every commander, to ensure secrets would never be captured. But why destroy what the ocean already owned? I closed my eyes. Somewhere above, men in tidy uniforms would log another confirmed kill, another successful test for their new miracle weapon. None of them would know the faces pressed against this metal. None would imagine the quiet dignity of men awaiting their final breath under 300 feet of indifferent sea. As sleep, or death, folded over me, I saw again that shimmering white trail of the hedge-hog bombs, rising this time, not falling. Perhaps it was light reaching down to take us home. Or perhaps it was memory refusing to die. In that moment, I was no longer a captain, nor an enemy, nor a man. I was a whisper in the deep, one of many carried by the tides, unseen, unheard, eternal. 40 years after the Atlantic swallowed us, the sea returned what it had taken, though not in flesh, only in memory. I remember none of the intervening decades, only the quiet dark, the slow drift of silt across metal, the way the hull turned from machine to monument. Time does strange things when measured in pressure and silence. The world above moved on, wars ended, flags changed, but down here, the cold remained eternal. When the first beam of white light pierced our tomb, I thought it was the same vision from my dying dream, the shimmer I'd seen before my last breath. But it was real, human, alive. Divers descended, their silhouettes alien behind bubbles and helmets, their lamps sweeping the deck that had once been my command post. Through their eyes, the ocean's floor unfolded like an archive of grief, rusted torpedoes, frozen tools, initials still carved on the crew's lockers. One diver raised his camera, recording everything, and his light caught the glint of my logbook, half buried in silt, clutched still in the bones of my hand. When he unsealed it, the water released a breath older than his lifetime. I could almost feel that air escape, a sigh carried upward toward a world that had long forgotten us. They would take it to the surface, decipher my final entries, marvel at the handwriting preserved by the cold. They would speak my name again, perhaps even say it with pity. But in truth, they would never understand. The reports would say U-515 was one of dozens lost to the Allied Hedgehog barrages, another wreck among thousands, another data point in a victory chart. But that statistic, that number, contained lives, my men, my fears, my daughter's laughter echoing in memory like sonar pings in the abyss. They would call the discovery historic, even romantic, a window into a forgotten era of undersea warfare. The newspapers would print tidy paragraphs, perhaps with phrases like heroism or advancement, but they would miss the deeper truth that the ocean had whispered to me long ago, that genius without mercy is simply madness wearing a uniform. As the divers' lights began to fade, I felt myself drift, not toward oblivion, but toward acceptance. The boat groaned one final time, as if grateful to be seen before being left to rest once more. The sea settled, the silt began to rise, and her embrace tightened gently, protective. Above the wreck, the divers floated upward, their bubbles rising like prayers to the surface, growing smaller until they vanished entirely. I watched them go, these men of a different war, and wondered if they could hear us, faintly, still humming below, the song that the British destroyers had sung that terrible morning. Maybe they thought it was the current, maybe they felt only the chill. But deep down, every man who sails the ocean knows that ships never truly die, they wait. And we, the hunters turned ghosts, keep vigil. The hedgehog ended our command, but it did not end our story. Somewhere far above, my daughter would be an old woman now. Perhaps she once stood at a memorial in Bremen, reading my name carved into stone. Perhaps she cried for a father she only half remembered. But here, I no longer needed redemption. The sea had taken my sins and given me silence. And as the last ray of light vanished from the wreck's control room, I whispered my final log entry to the darkness that had never abandoned me: the ocean forgives no one, but it forgets nothing. Then, as the current swept through once more, I closed my eyes and let the deep carry me back into its endless, quiet mercy.